Have you ever sat alone at night and asked yourself, how did silence become my loudest answer? I have, more times than I can count. Before I begin, I want to thank you for being here with me tonight, for giving your time to an old woman's story. You know, stories like mine aren't written in books. They're written in the quiet moments life gives us to think. And if you don't mind, may I ask, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are right now? I always find it beautiful, how the same story can travel across time zones and still touch a heart that's miles away. All right then, let me tell you about a time when silence was my only weapon, and pride was someone else's loudest voice. My name is Eleanor Grace, and for most of my life, I've lived inside the smell of warm bread and the hum of old ovens. I started baking when I was barely 23, standing in a tiny kitchen that could barely fit one soul and a dream. My husband, God rest his soul, used to say my cinnamon rolls could heal sadness faster than medicine. Maybe that's why I kept baking even after he passed away. It was the only way I knew how to survive. Over time, that little kitchen turned into Grace and Hearth Bakery, a place people said smelled like home. I never made millions, but I made something rarer, peace. Then came the day my only son, Liam, brought home a woman he called the love of his life, Sophie. She was beautiful, confident, and had that spark in her eyes that makes young men forget logic. I remember how her handshake was firm, her perfume expensive, and her smile just a little too practiced. I liked her. I truly did. But even that day, I felt it. The quiet space between her words, the kind of silence that doesn't mean shyness, but judgment. During the early months of their marriage, our home was filled with laughter. Sophie loved to host, and Liam adored her for it. But slowly, I started noticing her small remarks, like faint cracks on glass. Eleanor, you really still write all your recipes on paper? Why not go digital? You'd be more modern. Or, you still wear that apron? It's so old-fashioned. She said it with a smile, but you know the kind of smile that stings worse than a slap. I used to laugh it off. My dear, I'd say, the bread doesn't care what century it's baked in, but to her, my words sounded outdated, like the slow ticking of a clock in a world full of alarms. As months passed, Sophie began to talk more about independence, about making her own mark. I could see Liam being pulled in different directions, one by love, one by loyalty. One night they sat across from me at dinner. The candles were burning low, and I could feel something coming, that heavy kind of silence before a storm. Sophie cleared her throat and said, Eleanor, we've been thinking. It's time we move out. I put down my fork slowly. Move out? Liam reached for my hand. Mom, we just want our own place. You know, space to grow, to build our own life. His words were soft, but his eyes were nervous. I looked at Sophie, who was sitting tall, confident. I could tell it wasn't just space she wanted. It was distance. I smiled. Of course, my dear. Every bird must fly from the nest. That night, after they left the table, I sat alone by the window. The house felt like it had shrunk around me. The laughter that once echoed was now just memory dust in the air. I whispered to myself, so this is how silence begins, not with a shout, but a goodbye. A week later, they moved into their new apartment. I helped pack boxes, labeled everything neatly, and hugged Liam as if I wasn't breaking inside. Sophie thanked me, all grace and lipstick, then said softly, I hope you don't mind if we do things our own way now, I nodded. You always should. But the ache followed me home. I stood in my kitchen that night, staring at the empty chair where Liam used to sit and sneak bites of dough when he thought I wasn't looking. I baked a loaf of bread anyway. Because when you don't know what to say, sometimes you let the dough speak. Weeks passed. We talked occasionally, but it wasn't the same. Then one morning Liam called and said, Mom, Sophie's starting her own business. She's got an investor and everything. I congratulated her. Truly I did. But something inside me whispered a warning. Sophie had big dreams, which was good, but dreams without patience are like bread without yeast. They fall flat before they rise. One evening, Sophie came by the bakery. She looked radiant. New designer bag, phone in hand, talking about a grand online launch. She said she was creating her own brand, Sophie & Co., and how she'd outgrow small-town ideas like mine. I remember wiping my hands on my apron, smiling. Well, I said, dreams are like dough, my dear. They need time, not pressure. She laughed, tilting her head. With respect, Eleanor, that's your generation talking. We don't wait anymore. We make things happen fast. Sometimes, I said softly, fast burns. She didn't listen. In her eyes, I saw that dangerous sparkle, the kind that doesn't see cliffs until it's falling off them. Within a few months, they rented an expensive office, hired a team, took loans, and launched big. The whole town talked about it. People began saying, Sophie Grace, the modern businesswoman. Liam stopped visiting as much, and I just kept baking. But sometimes when I'd pass by their new place and see the lights on late at night, I'd wonder if Liam was smiling or surviving. One afternoon, he stopped by. He looked tired, thinner. He said softly, Mom, Sophie's been working day and night. We're almost there. Almost where, dear? He looked away. To success. I wanted to hold his hand and say, success isn't a place. Liam, it's peace. But I didn't, because sometimes advice feels like insult when pride is steering the heart. A few months later, the whispers started. Unpaid suppliers, missing funds, clients complaining. And then the name Daniel Moore began floating around, Sophie's charming investor. That night, as I closed my bakery, I saw Liam's car parked outside. He was sitting inside, head in his hands. I walked to the window and tapped gently. He looked up, his eyes red. Mom, we've lost everything. I didn't ask how. I already knew. I just opened the door, let him sit inside, and poured him a cup of tea. He didn't say much. Neither did I. The silence spoke for both of us. Because you see, when pride is too loud, silence becomes the only truth left. And that was just the beginning. They say silence teaches softly. But when pride is loud, even silence has to shout. I remember the night Liam came to me, broken in ways words can't mend. He didn't cry, not really. Men rarely do. But his eyes said everything his pride couldn't. We sat in my kitchen, just the two of us, the clock ticking louder than usual. I poured him another cup of tea, though neither of us really drank it. He said quietly, Mom, I should have listened. I wanted to hold him right then, to tell him it was all right. But I also knew some lessons lose their meaning when comfort comes too soon. So I just asked softly, Where's Sophie? He exhaled. She's staying with her mother for a bit. She said she needs space to think. About what? He gave a sad little smile. About whether she wants to stay in this marriage or not. And just like that, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. You see, the thing about pride is, it doesn't leave quietly. It burns everything on its way out. For days after, Liam stayed in the guest room upstairs. He'd wake early, wander aimlessly, stare at his phone, then disappear again. Sometimes I'd hear him in the garden, talking softly on the phone, trying, begging, reasoning. And sometimes silence answered him back. The house that once smelled of cinnamon and warmth now carried something else, grief in disguise. Weeks passed. Sophie didn't return. One morning, while I was setting trays in the bakery, I heard the doorbell. When I opened it, there she was, Sophie, standing there in a sharp coat, sunglasses covering most of her face. I'll be honest for a moment. I didn't know whether to hug her or brace myself. She took off her glasses, and I saw the first crack in her armor, tired eyes, the kind that hadn't slept properly in weeks. Can I come in? she asked. Of course, I said, stepping aside. She looked around the bakery, the shelves, the flour-dusted counters, the old wooden tables that had seen more tears than customers some days. You never changed this place, she murmured. Why would I? I smiled faintly. It still works. She didn't smile back. I thought you'd say something smug. I deserve it, I shook my head. You don't deserve smugness, Sophie. You deserve honesty. But I don't think you're ready for that yet. Her chin lifted, that old pride flickering like the last flame of a dying candle. I made a mistake, Eleanor. A terrible one. Daniel. He took the money and disappeared. The website's down, the investors want answers, and Liam. He's not talking to me. I folded my arms and leaned on the counter. And what do you want, my dear? She looked away. I want him to forgive me. Forgiveness is a strange thing, I said quietly. It doesn't bloom under pressure. It grows when you stop watering your ego. Her eyes filled. You think it's too late? For what? For fixing everything. I looked at her. This woman who once mocked my simplicity, now trembling like a leaf in the wind. It's never too late to fix what's broken, I said. But you have to stop pretending you didn't break it. She swallowed hard. I don't know how. Then start small, I said, handing her a dish towel. Help me clean the counter. She blinked, confused. What? Clean, wipe, do something real again. She hesitated, but then slowly took the towel. Together, we cleaned in silence. And maybe for the first time, her silence wasn't pride. It was humility, learning how to breathe. After that day, Sophie began coming to the bakery sometimes, not to talk much, but just to help. She'd arrange the pastries, take inventory, sometimes even serve customers. She wasn't perfect. She'd still sigh impatiently or check her phone too much. But she was trying, and I didn't tell Liam right away, because I wanted her to do it for the right reason, not to win him back, but to find herself again. One evening, as the sun sank low, she asked me, Eleanor, how did you do it? How did you survive everything, losing your husband, raising Liam, running this bakery alone? I smiled faintly. By losing things gracefully. You don't hold too tight to what isn't yours forever. You love it, thank it, and let it go if you must. She nodded slowly, looking down. I think I've held on to pride too long. Pride is like sugar, I said. Sweet at first, but if you keep adding it, it ruins the recipe. For the first time, she laughed, softly, genuinely. That night, she went home to talk to Liam. I didn't ask what happened, but the next morning Liam came by with breakfast for 2. She came home, he said quietly. I smiled. Good. He looked at me as if trying to understand. Mom, how did you know she would? I didn't, I said. But sometimes people don't need advice. They need space to hear their own hearts. Over the next few months, they started rebuilding, not just their finances, but their faith. Sophie took a small job at a local shop. Liam came back to help at the bakery part-time. Life wasn't perfect, but it was human again. And yet something inside me kept whispering, this isn't the end yet. Because you see, people often confuse regret with transformation. But transformation doesn't show up with tears. It shows up with choices. And one day, life decided to test Sophie's choice. It was a cold morning when she came to the bakery looking pale. Eleanor, she said, you got a minute? Of course. I was offered a job. At a new company. It's in the city. Great pay, big exposure. But it means moving again. I looked at her quietly. And Liam? He doesn't want to go, she admitted. He's happy here. But I can't just stay in this small town forever. I need to prove I can be more than your daughter-in-law who failed once. There it was again. Pride. Wearing a new dress, pretending to be ambition. I took off my gloves and said softly, do you remember what I told you once? About dreams needing time, not pressure. She nodded slowly. I continued, ambition is good, Sophie. But when you chase validation instead of purpose, you end up running in circles. Her lips trembled. You think I shouldn't go? I think, I said carefully, You should ask yourself if you're running towards something, or away from what you haven't healed yet. She didn't reply. That evening, Liam stopped by again, this time angry, frustrated. Mom, she wants to move to the city. She says it's her only shot to feel like herself again. Then let her decide, I said. But what if she leaves me? I sighed. Then you'll know she never stayed for love, only for comfort. And that's not your fault. The next few weeks were quiet, too quiet. Sophie was distant, distracted. Liam worked longer hours. The bakery became my refuge again, full of strangers' laughter, but my own solitude. Then one night, a storm rolled in, thunder cracking like glass. Around midnight I heard knocking at my door. It was Sophie, drenched, shaking. I couldn't go, she whispered. I packed, I tried. But when I looked at that train ticket, I saw myself leaving everything real behind again. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and said softly, "Then maybe this time you finally listened to silence." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I mocked your simplicity, Eleanor. I thought it was weakness, but it's the only thing that survived everything." "No, dear," I said, holding her hands. "It's not simplicity that survives. It's truth." That night, as the storm outside faded, something in her changed forever. The next morning, she came early to the bakery and said, "I want to start again, from scratch. No loans, no partners. Just me, learning properly this time. Will you teach me?" I smiled, my chest tightening with warmth. "Only if you're ready to get your hands dirty," she grinned. I think I already did. And that was the day I saw pride lose its voice completely, and humility learn to speak. In the weeks that followed, she became my right hand in the bakery. Customers loved her. She laughed again, not the polished laugh she once used, but the kind that comes from peace. Liam often joined us, and sometimes, when we'd close early, we'd sit outside under the dim lights and talk. Not about success or failures, but about bread, life, and the strange way they rise only after they rest. I watched her grow, softer, wiser. She'd ask for advice, she'd admit when she didn't know something, and she'd laugh at her own mistakes. And one afternoon, as we sat counting the day's earnings, she said, "Eleanor, you know what I realized?" "What's that, dear?" "I used to think confidence was being loud, but it's really just being calm," I smiled. "Then you've learned more than I could teach." She leaned on the counter, her eyes warm. "No, you taught me the one thing I needed most, that silence isn't weakness. It's strength waiting to be understood." And I thought to myself, maybe silence doesn't just teach pride a lesson. Maybe it teaches love how to last, because in the end, the loudest voices fade, but the quiet ones, they echo forever. Have you ever watched something heal so slowly, you almost didn't notice it happening? A scar, a heart, a broken relationship, they don't fix themselves overnight. They whisper their way back to wholeness, one humble breath at a time. Months passed after that stormy night when Sophie came back drenched and trembling. And in those months, the bakery, our small, flower-dusted world, became something else entirely. It became a sanctuary. She worked hard. I mean really hard. She'd wake up before dawn, tie her apron properly now, not just for looks, and knead dough until her palms turned red. She stopped wearing her glittered nails and shiny bracelets. Instead, she wore a simple band and a quiet smile. There were moments I'd catch her humming while arranging cupcakes or writing thank you notes to customers. She started an idea I had once dismissed years ago, a pay with kindness shelf. If someone couldn't afford bread, they could take one free, no questions asked. And every time a loaf left that shelf, Sophie's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. One evening as we cleaned up, she said, "Eleanor, I never thought I'd enjoy this. The smell of yeast, the noise of the mixer, the ache in my arms. It feels honest," I smiled. "That's because it is honest. Work done with peace never tires the soul, Sophie," She nodded slowly. I think I used to work for applause, not purpose. And now? She looked up. Now I just want to be useful. That's when I knew she was finally learning. Not from me, not from failure, but from the stillness of doing something real. But life, as it always does, had one more lesson to test her with. It was the bakery's 5th anniversary since we'd reopened under a new name, The Rise and Grace. A name Sophie came up with herself. Because every loaf rises and grace keeps it from falling, she'd said with a grin. That morning, the bakery was busier than ever. Balloons, flowers, local news, even a small crowd from the community came to celebrate. Liam had arranged everything perfectly with that calm, quiet charm his father once had. And just as I was greeting a customer, the door opened and in walked a ghost. Well, not a ghost, but close enough. It was him, Richard, my husband, the man who'd left me 20 years ago, chasing wealth and a younger woman. I froze. For a second, I thought my heart forgot how to beat. He stood there awkwardly, older, thinner, eyes sunken but familiar. He looked like a man who had lived too many winters without a home. Liam dropped the tray he was holding. Sophie looked at me, her face full of questions. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. Eleanor, I heard about your bakery. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I cut him off gently. But you did, he nodded. Yes, I just wanted to see it for myself. You've done well, I smiled faintly. Well, you always said I was stubborn. He gave a small, sad chuckle. That's true, you were. Maybe that's what I miss most. I didn't respond. There are silences meant to fill the air, and there are silences meant to remind people what they lost. He looked around, taking in the happy customers, the laughter, the warmth. Then he sighed. I didn't expect it to feel this alive. That's because it was built from pain, I said quietly. Pain has a funny way of growing roots when you water it with purpose. He nodded slowly, looking down. I made so many mistakes, Eleanor. When I left, I thought I'd find happiness in ease. But ease is empty. It doesn't teach. It just distracts. Sophie, who'd been standing nearby, whispered, He's your husband? I glanced at her. He was once. He looked at Sophie and Liam, and for a moment, his eyes softened. You two are lucky, he said to them. You've still got time to fix things. And then, almost shyly, he asked, May I buy a loaf? The one with the sesame crust. You used to bake that every Sunday. Of course, I said. Sophie reached for a loaf, but I stopped her. I walked around the counter myself, picked up the warmest one, and placed it in a brown paper bag. When he reached for his wallet, I shook my head. No charge, he hesitated. I can pay. I know, I said gently, but this one's on the house. He looked at me for a long time, his lips trembling, eyes wet. You still have the same heart, Eleanor. No, I said softly, meeting his gaze. I have the same heart, but it learned boundaries. He nodded slowly, clutching the bag as if it weighed more than it did. Then he turned to leave. Just before he reached the door, I added, Richard. He turned back, surprised. I smiled faintly. Take care of yourself, and this time, try not to run from quiet places. They tend to tell the truth. He gave a sad smile, the kind that comes when someone finally realizes the full cost of their choices, and walked away. For a long time after he left, the bakery was silent. Even the oven seemed to hum softer. Sophie stood by the counter, her face pale, her mind somewhere far away. Finally, she whispered, That's the man who left you? Yes, and you just gave him free bread, I nodded. Sometimes kindness isn't for them. It's for us, to prove we're no longer broken. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't think I could have done that. You will, I said softly. When your peace matters more than your pride. That evening, after the celebration ended and the last light flickered out, Sophie came to me with something folded in her hands, a piece of paper. I wrote this, she said. It's a letter. to myself, to remind me never to forget where I came from. She handed it to me, and I read it silently. It said, "Dear Sophie, don't mistake success for wisdom. You once thought simplicity was small, but it was strength, quiet, unshaken, and unbought. When you mocked your mother-in-law, you mocked patience. When you failed, she didn't say, 'I told you so.' She waited until you heard the silence yourself. And now that silence speaks inside you, softer but truer than ever before." I looked up, my throat tight. "This is beautiful," she smiled, wiping a tear. "You taught me everything in it." I just wrote it down. The next morning, something remarkable happened. A well-known local paper featured the Rise and Grace, not just for our pastries, but for the Pay with Kindness initiative. They wrote about how the bakery helped hundreds during the hard months, how customers called it the heart of the town. When the reporter asked who started it, Sophie pointed to me and said, "It was her." I just followed her example. For a second, I wanted to hide. I was never one for spotlights. But Sophie smiled at me like she finally saw me fully, not as a relic of the past, but as the quiet strength she always needed. Later that day, as we watched customers line up, she said softly, "Eleanor, I used to think you were just a baker, but you're more than that. You build people." I laughed gently. "No, dear, I just give them something warm when life turns cold." That night, we closed the bakery a little later than usual. The street outside glowed under soft yellow lamps, and a slow drizzle began to fall. Sophie and Liam stood by the doorway, watching the rain. She slipped her hand into his and looked back at me. "I used to think respect was earned by achievement," she said. "Now I know it's earned by grace." Liam squeezed her hand. "And you've learned from the best." I turned off the lights one by one, feeling that quiet peace that only comes when life's lessons settle into place. As I locked the door, I whispered under my breath, maybe to myself, maybe to the past. Some lessons are baked slowly, but when they're done right, they feed the soul forever. And that, my dear listeners, is the truth I've lived long enough to see. People may mock your simplicity. They may walk away from your wisdom. They may learn the hard way that pride doesn't keep you warm. But one day, when their noise fades and their pride burns out, they'll remember the quiet woman who never shouted, never begged, never broke, just kept baking hope in a small corner of the world, because experience doesn't need to speak loudly. It just needs to outlast the noise. Just remember, experience doesn't demand attention. It earns it, and true respect isn't claimed. It's remembered.